the biggest challengers to South Carolina's women's basketball supremacy this coming season? There are a couple of teams that come to mind.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Angelo, I'm the host of this podcast and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available, as always, both wherever you get your audio podcasts daily and also on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now, as new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Once again, we're going to talk about both women's basketball and football recruiting on today's show. At the end of the show, we'll talk about another commit for Shane Beamer and South Carolina's football program, this one on the defensive side of the ball. Again, we'll talk about that later in the show, but to start off today's show, want to continue talking about women's basketball. Obviously, the biggest story in Columbia right now, with Dawn Staley and her team capping off a perfect season, 38-0, national champions for the third time in program history. So, obviously, there's not a lot of questions necessarily about this team outside of, who's going to fill in Camila Cardoso's shoes for next season. And also, questions that are outside of South Carolina's program. Specifically, who could be the biggest challengers for the Gamecocks this next season? And when you look at the overall landscape, I do think that there are a couple of teams that possess similar traits that could potentially push South Carolina in the 2024 through 25 season. So let's start off with, in my opinion, the biggest challenger out of the rest of the field. And that is the Texas Longhorns. Now, Texas, obviously, they're leaving the Big 12 this offseason. They will be a part of the SEC this next year. Going to be a bit of a weird feeling. We'll see a familiar face in Vic Schaefer coming back to the league, and obviously we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But in terms of why Texas is the biggest challenger, at least in my opinion, to South Carolina or for South Carolina next year, it starts with the talent that they have on their roster, and particularly the fact that their talent is dispersed between multiple position groups. There's not just one area of this roster where Texas is just absolutely stacked, and then they got some question marks at, say, the other positions. Texas has really good players in every area of the floor in their starting lineup. And that starts, in my opinion, with redshirt junior Rory Harmon, who was their starting point guard this past season. Unfortunately, the Longhorns lost her, I believe, just like 12, 13 games into the season. Did not even make it to conference play, I don't believe. And obviously, therefore, they did not have her for the NCAA tournament. And I think that made a big difference in their Elite Eight loss against the NC State Wolfpack. But Harmon is a very good player. She was named an honorable mention All-American selection back in the 2022-23 season. She was also named the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year and a first-team All-Big 12 selection. So Harmon is one of the best players in the entire sport, and quite frankly, one that does not get discussed enough outside the Midwestern region. So she is going to definitely be a big reason why the Longhorns will be in the conversation as one of the better teams in the country this next season. They've also got rising sophomore wing Madison Booker. Booker took over the point guard duties once Harmon went down and had a fantastic season as a true freshman. She became the first freshman in Big 12 history to ever be named the Big 12 Player of the Year. So now you pair her up with a healthy Rory Harmon, and now she has a full year of college basketball under her belt. Booker is probably going to be an even bigger problem for a lot of teams this next season. And then you look at their front court. They also have Taylor Jones. Now, Jones, I don't know for a fact if she's going to come back next year. She does have the option. She has the eligibility, I believe, whether it's through injury or it's through COVID, but she could return. And if she did, it would be a big addition for this team in the Longhorns, as she averaged 14 points and 7 rebounds in just 16 games this past season, assuming that she also dealt with injuries much like Rory Harmon did. So, you can already see that this team, again, they've got talent at the guard spot, they've got a really good wing player, Madison Booker, and they've got a good front court player in Taylor Jones. Now, the other reason why this team, in my opinion, would be the biggest challenger for South Carolina next season is the roster continuity. When we talk about South Carolina, the first thing we talk about when it comes to next year's team is how they're right now only guaranteed to lose Camila Cardoso. Well, right now, the Longhorns are only guaranteed to lose one player in their own right, and that is Staley Gonzalez, who was a graduate player and exhausted her eligibility at the end of this past season. So, almost everybody is coming back, and if you're going to make a run to the Final Four, if you want to challenge a team like South Carolina for the national championship, you're probably going to need to have a lot of experience, not just in terms of the amount of years you've played basketball, but with how long this particular group has played together, and the Longhorns definitely possess that. Now, the last factor that I want to bring up for why I think the Longhorns could be the biggest challenger for the Gamecocks next year, it goes back to Vic Schaefer, and I'm sure some of y'all get sick and tired of hearing me talk about Vic Schaefer, but listen, you cannot deny the man has got a really, really good resume. First of all, for most programs that are switching conferences, the transition would probably be a lot more difficult. And Texas, obviously, playing the Big 12 the past few years, it's a bit of a different brand compared to the SEC. However, the thing that's going to help Texas in their transition to this conference is Vic Schaefer knows the SEC better than almost anybody in women's college basketball. He was a part of the league for 23 years, from 1997, when he was an assistant coach at Arkansas, all the way to 2020, when he was obviously the head coach of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Also, Vic Schaefer has experience making deep runs in the NCAA tournament. They just went to the Elite Eight this past season without their starting point guard in Rory Harmon. He's also won a championship as an associate head coach with Gary Blair at Texas A&M, and he went to the Final Four, a national championship game, twice when he was with Mississippi State. So, Vic Schaefer knows what it takes to get there. And again, I'm going to value experience heavily when we talk about who could be the biggest test for South Carolina this next season. And for all those reasons, I think that it is pretty much a slam dunk that Texas is going to be the biggest challenger for South Carolina this next winter. Now, obviously, I do think there are a couple of other teams outside of Texas that could maybe push South Carolina. And again, familiarity is definitely one of the key trends between the other teams here as well. So we're going to talk about those two other teams in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for games at the ballpark. Now, unfortunately, the Braves have had a couple games deal with some rain the past few days against the New York Mets. However, the Braves have another intriguing series taking place this coming weekend against the Texas Rangers, who were the ALCS champions this past baseball season. First game will take place on Friday, April the 19th at 7:20 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and there's going to be some Friday night fireworks that I believe will take place after the game. You could get tickets as cheap as $27 in the grandstands for that ball game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Thursday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. We cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. So, I think the Texas Longhorns could be the biggest challenger for South Carolina's women's basketball team this next season. But who are number 2 and number 3? Let's continue our talk with number 2. And in this slot, I have the UCLA Bruins. Now, why do I have the Bruins listed here? Well, the first point I want to bring up here is the Bruins are one of a few teams in women's college basketball heading into next season that have a talented core of players that have been together for a couple of years now. So when I talk about this core for UCLA, I'm of course talking about Kiki Rice. I'm talking about Lauren Betts, who did transfer in this past offseason. Gabrielle Jaquez, who is a really good two-way player for them, and also a London Jones, who will probably take over for Charisma Osborne, who I believe exhausted her eligibility at the end of this past NCAA tournament. But all of those 4 players are rising juniors. And again, outside of Betts, I think they've all been together since the beginning of their college career at UCLA. So, a lot of chemistry there. They know each other quite well. They know how to play off of one another. And again, if you're going to take down a team like South Carolina or even give yourself a shot to do so, I think that is something that you're going to need to have. And UCLA, they've got that with their current roster. Now, another reason why I think UCLA could challenge South Carolina, and this more so revolves around one of the players I've already mentioned, Lauren Betts. The thing about Lauren Betts is she is the starting center for the Bruins. Betts is listed at 6'7". She started her career at Stanford 2 seasons ago and then transferred to UCLA, where she thrived this past season. I believe was on the verge of averaging a double-double throughout the entire year. Dealt with a little bit of injury issue, but when she is healthy and she is on the floor, she changes the entire complexion of that UCLA basketball team. She's got great touch around the rim. I wouldn't say that she has quite the motor that a Camila Cardoso has, where she can just run from one end to the other of the floor and, get a fast break layup per se in tandem with her point guard. But Betts is definitely a dominant force down there. And look, right now, South Carolina, again, like we talked about on our Wednesday show, they've got options at the 5 spot in terms of who they could go with. They could go with a Sinai Fagan. I know some people say that they think Ashlyn Watkins could fill in that slot. Maybe Adele Tack if she comes back from that injury and is developing at a very good rate. Or maybe they even go into the transfer portal and get somebody. But no matter who ends up starting there, very likely Lauren Betts is going to possess a couple of advantages, maybe in terms of experience, maybe in terms of just her height. And South Carolina, it really hasn't been the case since 2018 when they have played a team that had a clear and obvious advantage at one of the front court spots. The last time I could think that was the case was the 2017-18 season when they were playing, ironically enough, Vic Schaefer and the Mississippi State Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs had a center by the name of Tierra McGowan, who I believe was 6'8", and basically grabbed about 20 rebounds, it seemed like, a game. And when South Carolina lost some of the players that they had from the national title squad they had the year prior, it was just really tough to contend with. And so you could see that potentially playing out against Lauren Betts and UCLA if these two were to match up against one another, which would obviously have to be maybe a regular season non-conference game or maybe playing each other in the NCAA tournament. And speaking of playing each other in the NCAA tournament, that goes along with my last reason for why I think UCLA could challenge South Carolina. Corey Close and Dawn Staley, they are familiar with one another. They both played against each other and coached against each other twice 2 seasons ago in the 2022-23 season. Once in the regular season at South Carolina, and then once again in the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament that same season. So they know each other well. Obviously, South Carolina's a different team. UCLA, in a couple ways, are a different team since those games took place. So it's not a full carryover, but again, there's a familiarity there. And that's something that you probably need to have if you want to try to beat South Carolina. UCLA possesses that. So for that reason, I've got UCLA at number 2 on the list of biggest challengers for South Carolina's women's basketball team this next season. In the final slot, I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, Notre Dame, unlike the other two teams, their talent is not completely dispersed in terms of their backcourt, wing spot, and their front court. Although, I will say, their backcourt has the potential to be potentially the best. I just completely repeated myself there. Their backcourt's going to be one of the best in the country next season. That's the point I'm getting at there. Hannah Hidalgo is going to be their starting point guard unless something crazy happens with the portal. She was a first-team All-American this past season. Was pretty quiet in that regard in terms of the coverage that accomplishment got. I was a bit surprised to see that. I knew that she was probably going to be an All-American. First team, though, pretty rare for a true freshman to claim that honor. And she also was named the ACC's Defensive Player of the Year. And one could argue, if Hidalgo did not have an off shooting day against Oregon State in the Sweet 16, the Gamecocks very likely would have been playing the Fighting Irish in the Elite Eight to make it to the Final Four. But Hidalgo did not shoot the ball well, and so therefore their season ended. But this next season, she's going to be playing alongside an Olivia Miles. Now, Miles missed all of last year with a significant, I want to say it was a knee injury that she suffered 2 tournaments ago. So she missed all of last year. She's going to have to knock the rust off. They're going to have to learn how to play with each other. But once they get their chemistry down, it's going to be dangerous for everybody else. Because Miles was a second-team All-American in the 2022-23 season before she got hurt. So the Fighting Irish, not going to have any issues in that backcourt whatsoever. Also, like I've mentioned, with the Texas, with UCLA, what does Notre Dame have? They've got roster continuity. Sonia Citron, she is also going to be back this next season. She kind of plays the wing and also a little bit of the guard spot, or one of the guard spots, can handle the ball a little bit. She has started 75 games for the Fighting Irish over the past 3 years. They also could bring back forward Maddie Westbeld. Now, Westbeld has the option to go on to the WNBA or go professional if she wants to, has yet to announce her decision, which kind of tells me that she might be leaning towards coming back. Maybe she's going to release a video on it. But if she does come back, that's 120 starts that is coming back to the Fighting Irish for next season. And that's at one of the front court spots. Maddie Westbeld, I believe, is basically your modern 4 that can stretch the floor, can take mid-range jumpers, can even shoot the 3-ball from time to time as well. So if they get Maddie Westbeld back with Sonia Citron, Olivia Miles coming back from injury, you can see very quickly where I'm going with this. Notre Dame's going to have one of the most talented and experienced starting lineups in the entire country next year. And that alone could take them very far in the NCAA tournament and potentially lead to a matchup with South Carolina. And once again, last thing I'll say, program familiarity, it also exists with Notre Dame. South Carolina and Notre Dame played each other in the season opener in Paris this past season, and obviously, South Carolina did win that game quite handedly over the course of 4 quarters. However, you do have to respect the fact that, look, they did not have to deal with an Olivia Miles. It was Hannah Hidalgo's first game. So, do I think they could be maybe a tougher out if they were to match up again next season? And again, they have all these players back and healthy. Yeah, I do think they could be a tougher out. So, in terms of the biggest challenges for South Carolina's women's basketball team next season, I got Texas at 1, I've got UCLA at 2, and Notre Dame at 3. Let me know in the comments if you agree with that or if there's another team that you think should be included in this list. But we're going to end today's show with a little bit more football recruiting talk as Shane Beamer and his staff are starting to heat back up once again on the trail, landing another commitment, this one a Palmetto State native in safety Damarcus Leach. So what could Leach bring to South Carolina secondary when he arrives? We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and baseball season is also in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. We're getting down to the wire here in the NBA regular season, and a few teams are fighting for positioning. Some teams will have to play in the play-in tournament. One of those teams is going to be the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference. Right now, the Warriors are slotted 10th in the standings, but they have a comfortable 5-game lead over the Rockets. But FanDuel does not like their chances to make it to the 8-team playoff portion of the bracket. They've got Yes listed at plus 124 to make the playoffs, and the Warriors missing the playoffs listed at minus 152. So again, an interesting prop bet there. You think Draymond Green is going to be able to stay in these games and help out his teammates, or could it be the end of the Warriors dynasty altogether? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. All right, let's wrap up today's show by talking about South Carolina's newest football commit in safety prospect, Damarcus Leach. Damarcus Leach plays for, I believe, Abbeville High School here in the state of South Carolina. So it's always good to keep your in-state prospects here at home. And when looking at some of the traits that Leach possesses, it seems like that he could definitely help out this team when he gets to campus, assuming that he gets to campus, I should say. Athletically speaking, the thing that stood out to me the most when watching Leach's junior year highlights from his Huddle account is that Damarcus, he kind of glides when he runs. And it's kind of tough to explain, but basically, he's not necessarily someone that has quick feet, but he also is not someone that is a long stride runner. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. So it kind of seems like that he literally is just gliding on grass. But I will say, Damarcus has pretty solid speed. If I had to give you like an estimated 40 time, I'd probably say a low 4.5, high 4.4. So he's definitely got the speed to play in the SEC in terms of his straight line speed. Now, when talking about his position, he plays a lot of safety. He's also played some nickel for his high school this past season. He does a good job of reading the quarterback's drop back movement or maybe his eyes to actually gauge where the ball is going. So he showcased this on screen plays when he was the nickel corner, and he also showcased this on some long drawn out passing plays where the quarterback kind of rolled out from the pocket and tried to throw to somebody over the middle of the field. But he has shown the potential to be able to read the quarterback's eyes and let him guide him to where the ball is actually going. And that's what you want to see in your safeties. So Leach does possess that trait as well. And also, when the play goes away from Damarcus Leach, the ball gets thrown to the other side of the field, guy catches it, maybe breaks a tackle or two, and he takes off running down the field. Looks like he's going to score a touchdown. Damarcus Leach understands the importance of pursuit angles. He's got the speed to chase down a ball carrier from the other side of the field, and he knows what kind of angle he has to take in order to make the tackle. And those are some of the toughest pursuit angles to make and also capitalize on when you're literally sprinting from the other side of the field trying to chase someone down that has got green grass in front of them and nothing else. So Leach also has shown the ability to do that as well. So with all that being said, I do see Damarcus Leach definitely as a safety at the next level. It's funny how South Carolina has just stacked up their safety position with South Carolina natives, but there's been a good run on safety prospects in the Palmetto State over the past few recruiting cycles. So the Gamecocks continue to add to that with Damarcus Leach. I would say that there's going to need to be a little bit developing here. I think that he could get a little bit more refined in some other areas, but the potential, I think, is definitely there. He's got the speed, and I think that based on some of the other things I saw, he's definitely got the IQ to hit a higher ceiling once he gets to Columbia, assuming he gets to Columbia and then actually stays long enough for that development to take place. And of course, we'll see how all that takes place when it all goes down. So with that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show. As always, I know somebody's going to say there is no challenger for South Carolina, but come on, let's have a conversation about this. Who do you think could be the biggest challenger for South Carolina? Again, do you think it's Texas, UCLA, Notre Dame, or would you replace one of those teams with somebody else? And also, what are your first initial thoughts on Damarcus Leach and South Carolina landing him for the 2025 recruiting class. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.